بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. If I can get Hafidh Leon to actually just read his Arabic is nicer and clearer and probably better than mine, definitely. So inshallah, we'll read Hadith number 6 from Imam Nawawis rahimahullah, 40 Hadith, the Arba'in, Kitab al-Arba'in, Imam Nawawi, Hadith number 6.
عن أبي عبد الله بن نعمان بن بشير رضي الله عنهما قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن الحلال بين وإن الحرام بين وبينهما أمور مشتبهات لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس فمن اتقى الشبهات فقد استبرأ لدينه وعرضه ومن وقع في الشبهات وقع في الحرام كالراعي يرعى حول الحمى يوشك أن يرتع فيه ألا وإن لكل ملك حمى ألا وإن حمى الله محارمه ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب رواه البخاري ومسلم.
Excellent. On the authority of Abu Abdullah and Nu'man, the son of Bashir, and Nu'man ibn Bashir, may Allah be pleased with them both, who said, I heard the Messenger of Allah, may Allah's blessings and peace be upon him, say, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that which is lawful is plain, and that which is unlawful is plain. And between the two of them are doubtful matters about which not many people know. Thus, he who avoids doubtful matters clears himself in regards to his religion and his honor. But he who falls into doubtful matters falls into that which is unlawful, like the shepherd who pastures around a sanctuary, all but grazing therein. Truly every king has a sanctuary, and truly Allah's sanctuary is his prohibitions. Truly in the body there is a morsel of flesh or a piece of flesh, which if it be whole, all of the body is whole, and which if it be diseased, all of it is diseased. Truly it is the heart, related by Bukhari and Muslim. So this hadith number 6 is an incredibly important hadith on the authority of Abu Abdullah and Nu'man ibn Bashir radiyallahu anhu. Nu'man ibn Bashir radiyallahu anhu, this great Sahabi, he was born 2 years into the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So 2 years after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to Medina, and Nu'man ibn Bashir was born. He was born to Sahabis, okay, who were resident of Medina, who were from the Ansar. And it is said that he is the first of the Ansar children to be born after the arrival of the Prophet ﷺ. So his birth was quite a joyous occasion. And of course, by the time the Prophet ﷺ passes away, Nu'man ibn Bashir is about 8 years old. Okay. He, as he grows up to be a very pious man. He grows up to be a man who has great command of Arabic poetry. He grows up to be a person who is incredibly devout. He is known to be a khatib, a very brilliant khatib, someone who gives sermons, exhortations, khutbah, khatib khutbah. And there generally is an art to giving a khutbah. The art obviously revolves around sincerity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it also revolves around allowing hearts to be stirred by one's admonition, exhortation, or khutbah. Just by the son of Abu Dharr radiallahu anhu, the great Sahabi Abu Dharr, who is famed for his piety as well. his son asked him, how is it, O father, that when you give khutbah, people weep? People are given to weeping and crying. And when others give khutbahs, not a teardrop in sight. And he said, oh my son, the mother in whose hands, the mother whose son has died, is not like the one. Is not the tears of the mother whose son has died. Is not like the tears of the hired mourners, the paid mourners that used to happen at the time of the Arabs. They used to get women to come in and mourn and cry and whatever. So he said, the mother whose son has died, her tears are not like the one who is paid to cry. Okay, meaning hers are from ikhlas, hers are genuine. Okay, and so when the heart speaks genuinely for Allah in accordance with the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah allows other hearts to connect. Anyway, he was a great khatib as well, and he was made a judge by Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and he was a judge in Damascus. He was slain, he was killed in the Battle of Siffin in a civil war. And he narrates around about 114 hadiths. Amongst those hadiths, this particular hadith. And this particular hadith, he says, I heard Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam say, "Inna al-halala bayyinun wa inna al-harama bayyinun." Indeed, the halal, the lawful, is clear. Bayyin. Bayyin is something crystal clear. There is no vagueness in it at all. So, inna al-halala bayyinun wa inna al-harama bayyinun. The halal, the lawful, is clear. And the unlawful, the haram, is clear. وَبَيْنَهُمَا مُشْتَبِهَاتٌ لَا يَعْلَمُهُنَّ كَثِيرٌ مِنَ النَّاسِ. And between these two clear-cut matters, there are grey areas, shades of grey. Okay, how has it been translated here? Mushtabihat, because it can be translated in 3 or 4 ways. In between them, there are doubtful matters about which not many people know. So the first thing to know is that the halal is clear. And this is what we'd expect when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us guidance in the form of the Quran, gives us hidayah in the form of the Quran, and this is the last revelation that will ever come to the people of this earth. Okay, then we expect it to be very clear, especially on the fundamentals. Especially on the fundamental beliefs, the fundamental practices, the fundamental ways of spiritually growing. We expect it to be very clear. And that's exactly what we find. Things that Allah made halal is very clear. The meat that we're allowed to eat is very clear from the meat that we're not allowed to eat. The drinks that we're allowed to drink is very clear from the few drinks that we're not allowed to drink. Vegetables and bread and water is clearly halal. And clearly haram is wine and khinzir, pork or pig's meat, or carrion, meat that has been, animals like a sheep that has just died without being lawfully slaughtered, then that is what we call not meta, but we call that carrion in English, carrion meat, just meat of a dead animal that hasn't been ritually slaughtered according to Islam. It's haram. So halal is bayyin and the haram is bayyin. And for most of our lives, this is not only more than enough, this is highly significant because it gives us a good basis. It not only gives us a good basis, it gives us that kind of foundation which is unshakable, which is not like what you find in other civilizations where 1 minute, today, something is the fashion of the time and it's good and it's okay and it's moral, and then a few years later it's going to change, and a few years later it will change again. And constantly people are having to kind of change and keep up with the times. When you keep up with the times, it's very hard to have genuine morality. Morality in the sense of what is right and wrong. When we talk about morals and morality, then we're talking about issues of what is right and what is wrong. When we come to issues of what is right and what is wrong, we call that in English morals and morality. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a clear sharia in which the halal is clear and the haram is clear. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, and between the two, there are these grey areas, these doubtful areas, which not many people know about. The halal is that which the Quran will make halal, obviously by extension the Sunnah makes halal. The haram is that which the proof texts make haram. And then there are grey areas in the middle that the Prophet says not many people know about. Who knows about them? Someone knows about them. The rightly guided scholars, those who are really entrenched in knowledge, they know these grey areas, this issue, which for most people is a grey area, but for the rightly guided scholars it's either in the camp of the halal or it's in the camp of the haram. Why? Because their firm knowledge allows them to understand the Sharia text, the daleels, the evidences, the proofs. And the proofs will tell them that it's either in this camp of haram or it's in this camp of halal, lawful. Even though to other people it's not so clear because they don't have that Sharia knowledge. What would make a proof, what would make something doubtful or grey area? Not so much doubtful, but a grey area. For example, on the one hand you might have some verse of the Quran or some hadith saying, seemingly suggesting that something is halal. And then you might have elsewhere in the Quran or some other hadith telling you, oh, it's haram. I gave an example last week, I think, not of this thing, but an example I gave last week which will help this week, is on the one hand you have the Prophet ﷺ saying, let none of you drink standing. You even have Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu drinking water and then he standing and then he puts his finger down his mouth to empty it out. Let none of you drink standing. And yet we have, and that's in Sahih Muslim, in the Sunan of Tirmidhi, we have, or Abu Dawud, we have narrations in which the Prophet ﷺ is drinking standing. So now this can become a grey area. Because on the one hand, he says, don't drink standing. On the other hand, he himself drinks standing. So how do we reconcile? How do we make jump? Okay, and you need to have good knowledge to be able to reconcile the text. First and foremost, you have to have enough knowledge to know that there are two sets of hadiths on the same issue. You have to have enough knowledge of that. And then secondly, when you have enough knowledge, you have to have the knowledge to see, well, hold on, how do we reconcile? Maybe one instruction of the Prophet came first, and then the next one came second. So it becomes like abrogated. One time the Prophet, for example, one time the Prophet might have said, oh, do not drink standing, and then later on he cancels it. And he drinks standing to show, no, we don't do that anymore, now we can drink standing. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the abrogation is the other way around. One day the Prophet, once upon a time the Prophet was allowing us to drink standing, and then later on he says, do not drink standing. But in order for abrogation to occur, for something to cancel out another, for one part of the Prophet's teachings to cancel another, we need to know what came first and what came second. We need to know dates, time periods. And if that's not possible, then it's very difficult to say one cancels out the other. Then we might need to turn towards another Islamic principle, which is that maybe they say al-qawl taqaddam min al-fi'l. Okay, that the words of the Prophet, if there ever is a contradiction, a discrepancy, then the commands of the Prophet take precedence over his actions. Because he might have been in a tight circumstance to act in a particular way, but his statement is very clear. So in this case, it could be reconciled by saying, well, he said, let none of you drink standing, and his action tells us he drank standing. So in this case, we'll take the words over the action. That's another way that could be reconciled. But then we'd have to know the rule that governs that. Al-qawl taqaddam min al-fi'l. Or, there's another way to reconcile, which is to say, well, there's a way to act upon both of these. We don't have to cancel this one or that one. We don't have to take the word over the action or the action over the word. We can act upon both of them. And normally, the vast majority of scholars, classically and now, have always favoured reconciling the proofs in a way where you can act upon both without leaving one or the other. And the way that you act upon both is to say, when the Prophet ﷺ says, let none of you drink standing, that wasn't an absolute command, that was a high encouragement. That it's so better for you to not to drink standing, and it's so better for you to drink sitting. And when the Prophet ﷺ drank standing, it was just to show the allowance, to show it was jaiz. So now you have the permissibility of drinking standing, but the preference, the preferability of sitting down and drinking. And by that we're acting on both proofs. This is just an example, and it's, to tell the truth, it's quite a simple example of what the scholars, the fuqaha of Islam have to go through when they have apparently conflicting texts. Okay? Which is why, I repeat again, it's so crazy when you get a brother or a sister who is not trained or schooled, neither in classical Arabic, Quranic Arabic, nor in fiqh, in Islamic law, in Sharia. They're not schooled in Sharia, and they say, I will decide what is strongest. They have no knowledge of any of these rules, let alone the subtleties. Okay. So, there are things which for many people could be a bit greyish. Well, do I drink standing? Do I not drink? Or do I do this? Do I not do that? That's because they don't have the ability to reconcile the proofs. But those ulama, scholars that have the ability, the fuqaha that have the ability, then those issues aren't grey or doubtful matters to them. It's clear it either belongs in this camp or it belongs in that camp, depending upon the rules they use to weigh up. Otherwise, by Allah's mercy, His Sharia is such that, especially in the main things of a human being's life, that halal bayyinun, innal haram bayyinun. The halal is clear-cut and the haram is clear-cut. It's something that you don't need to be a trained scholar to understand. You don't even have to be an adult to understand. You can get the basic halals and harams even when you're quite young. Okay? But between the two, there are these grey areas. And they are grey, relatively speaking. It's not grey to the rightly guided, qualified scholars, but it could be grey and shady to the rest of the people. But what to do? In those, what seems to me to be grey, shady areas, and there will be sometimes the scholars themselves, sometimes they'll say, that's a bit of an iffy, tricky question. There are some issues which the scholars will say that's a bit of a tricky question, in that there will be some issues which aren't clearly haram or makruh, and they're not clearly halal, obligatory, halal or allowed or recommended. It might be a 50-50. There are some issues like that for some scholars. For those scholars, or for us in general, whenever we come across any issue that we feel to be, well, first and foremost, when we come to grey areas and we don't know, the first port of call is فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ ذِكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. As the Quran says, ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. The Prophet said the cure for ignorance is to ask. Okay? Ask who? Yeah, the people of knowledge. It is not allowed for me to ask a religious question to someone who's not a person of knowledge unless I know that person who is not a person of knowledge to be a naqil, a trustworthy transmitter of religious knowledge. The Muslim peoples in this regard are of three types. Either we are qualified scholars to give religious rulings, ahkam and fatwa. Or secondly, we are not qualified scholars, but we are knowledgeable and reliable and precise enough to understand what the scholars are talking about and to convey exactly what the scholar said in his fatwa to the one who asks. Such a person is called a naqil, a transmitter. But in order to transmit correctly, you have to understand the language of the ulama, the language of the scholars. If a scholar says that is mustahab, it means that is recommended. If you do it, you get rewarded. If you don't do it, there's no sin. But if I'm the type of person who doesn't understand what mustahab is and what is haram, mustahab, makruh, and says, oh yeah, it's the mustahab, bismillah, it's mustahab. Oh, the scholar said it's an obligation. But no, mustahab is not fard or wajib. Mustahab is something encouraged but not obligatory. So I cannot be a naqil, a transmitter, if I don't understand that level of language. So I have to have some religious knowledge. I have to be trained at some level. But let's say I am trained at that level, but I'm not very, I just don't have a very good memory. So yes, Abu Ali, so what did the Mufti say? Well, I understand all that the Mufti says because I'm trained in that language. I can't remember now. I think he was saying, yeah, maybe it could be haram, maybe if you don't do it, you get punished in hellfire forever. I can't remember, just do it. Then I'm not much of a naqil, a transmitter, because not that I don't have the ability to understand. In this case, I don't have the ability to memorize what was said. Okay, Chinese whispers. So you're either a qualified scholar or a qualified naqil, or just an ordinary layperson. So the ordinary layperson can't transmit fatwas. I mean, you can say, look, it's in that book, it's on that website, he's in that masjid. And if it's kind of, and he can say, well, the scholar said something like X, Y, Z, but, don't take my word, go and look, check up yourself, but I remember him saying something like this. But no layperson should put their hand up and say, yeah, I remember what the scholar said, unless they have these qualities. Or unless it's something really simple. And today, and so when Allah says, Allah is commanding us to go to those people who are qualified, either as scholars or qualified, either as naqilun, as transmitters of religious knowledge, even if they're not from those high-level scholars. Otherwise, khalas. No. And today, whether we're asking questions in the newspaper or better still, asking questions on the phone to some channel, Muslim channel on TV, how do you know? How do you know? Okay. And while it is true, just because you're young, it doesn't mean you don't have knowledge. But when you're young and you have not even a hair on your chin, right, or anywhere else on your body for that matter, how are you going to be given fatwas for life and marriage and all of these big, deep things that generally comes with knowledge and experience? But here I am sitting on the TV channel, but because it's got a Muslim name and some Muslim colours, they must be okay. Why? Don't chance your salvation and your connection with Allah for a maybe. Ask those who are known to be scholars. If you don't know, if someone is unknown to you, or you're not confident in that person's knowledge because they're not known to you, don't make a judgment on them, because they may be a good scholar. But just go to the one who your heart feels confident that is a scholar. If you make a judgment against someone who turns out to be a scholar, then we've committed a monstrous sin. But if I go to someone because I wasn't sure and it turned out he's a scholar, I'm not sinful. Because I never made a judgment and I had to go to those who I recognized to be, and I didn't recognize that person to be a scholar. Later on maybe I did, but at that time I didn't, so I went and did the sure thing. It's really important. Otherwise, subhanAllah, we have anarchy in our fatwa giving, because any jackass is giving fatwa. Any fool, cretin, is giving fatwas nowadays. And fatwas kill. Fatwas can rip a family apart, can rip a husband and wife apart, can rip children from their parents, can rip a society. And most of these people, most of these charlatans, that's probably the best word, these fake sheikhs. I say fake sheikhs why? They know that most of them are just tulab al-ilm, students of knowledge, who have barely read a book or two, whose Arabic is so fractured, and even if their Arabic is good, their religious understanding is so poor. They haven't burnt the midnight oil candle. Yeah, they don't really deeply just have casual reading. They have more reading than their average Muslim, but they have no reading compared to what scholars read. And they haven't studied fiqh. If you know, if a person knows they're like that, surely the piety in the heart says, you know what, ask me some ABC questions, but don't ask me the XYZ questions. That's fine. I know the ABC questions well, so ask me the ABC questions, but don't ask me the difficult ones. You need to, but no, let me answer now. And you see so much rubbish on the table. So much rubbish. A'udhu billah. And on top of that, when a sheikh doesn't know adab al-ikhtilaf, the etiquettes of differing. I'm not talking about the etiquettes of differing of smiling, soft speech. Etiquettes of differing in there is a valid difference of opinion on this issue because both sides who ascribe to the book and the sunnah and the ijma, our Sharia foundations, okay, or the book sunnah, ijma and qiyas as we covered last week, both who ascribe to the orthodox ways of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, these scholars are legitimately differing because they have their own evidences to suggest this way or that way. And here, the sheikh doesn't even know that. If the sheikh doesn't know that, he's not a sheikh that has the right, that deserves to be giving fatwas. One of the conditions they used to say of giving fatwas to the masses is you should have some basic understanding of the fatwas of other scholars, so that in legitimate difference of opinion, you can at least positively guide people. So, for example, here is an issue, and a small faction of people, normally Salafi brothers, normally Salafis do this, okay? Well, not always, but normally. There is an issue in Islam which is nearly 1,000 years old. When you make dua to Allah, Ya Allah, Allahumma Rabbana, can you say something like words like that? Oh Allah, grant to me good health or success, or that I get the promotion, and accept my dua because of the status of your Prophet, because of the honor of your Prophet, because of the Prophet. Asking Allah by means of the rank of the Prophet or the Prophet himself, that process is called wasila or tawassul. So can we make tawassul with the Prophet to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You'll find not 1, 2, 3, 4, but over 20 years, last 2 decades, many Salafis, men and women in this country, even those who have graduated from Salafi universities, will say either, oh, it's shirk, or it's a deviation, and people who do this, and people who have always done it, they're dodgy, deviant, misguided Muslims outside of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. You might find the odd 1 in a million, 1 in 1,000, saying that actually, even though I don't do it, it's a legitimate difference of opinion. You'll find 1 in 1,000 say this. Otherwise you'll find most of them, they'll have a go at it like, subhanallah, like it's the worst thing since idolatry. And some of them have even called it shirk. Okay, so there. Yet, I question this by saying, how can you really be a decent student of knowledge, let alone a scholar, when in this issue, not only do you have hadith in the Sunan of Tirmidhi, in the Mu'jam of Tabarani, but you have people like Imam Ahmad on record as saying that I make tawassul with the Prophet in every dua, or in my dua, encouraging people to do this. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. Okay? To the degree that by the 6th Islamic century, when two of the greatest books on Islamic law were ever written, the Majmu' by Imam Nawawi and Al-Mughni by Ibn Qudama, they were almost written in the same time. And these books on fiqh, what they did was, they recorded all of the major opinions of the Imams of the last 600 years on any given issue. Comparative fiqh. So you want to know the issue on where to fold the hands, and they will tell you that according to this Imam, based upon this hadith, he folded his arms there, and another Imam folded his arms there, and based upon the practice of these Sahabas and this and that, some Imams folded let their hands dangle. If you want to know this opinion, blah 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 blah. Al-Majmu' of Imam Nawawi, the author that we're reading from, or Ibn Qudama, the famous Hanbali scholar, their books have become a treasure source for knowing the differences of opinion. In those books, tawassul is established. And in fact, there doesn't seem to be a dissenting voice. 100 years later though, Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayh wrote a book in the 8th century of Islam, and he dissented from this. He said, no, the hadiths are there, but I don't think the hadiths are authentic. And therefore, if there's no authentic hadith, there's nothing directly in the Quran, we should just stick with the tawassuls that are already established in Islam. But this type of tawassul, no. So tawassul is there because tawassul is mentioned in the Quran, but this form comes from these hadiths, and I don't believe the hadiths are authentic. Most scholars ignored his opinion, just thought he's erred, made a blunder, made a mistake. And so for the next 500-600 years, no one took any notice of it, because every good steed, every good horse falls. Every good horse trips over sometimes. Okay. But then in the recent ages, with this kind of, the Sahih Islam, whatever, okay, some people have become obsessed with it, taken Ibn Taymiyyah's statement, and they use it in a way that he didn't even use it, to now say that if you do this dodgy thing, which has been done for the last 1300 years, no great, other than Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, we don't find a major Imam having a clear objection to it. And not only do you not know that, you're using it to divide the Muslims, when it's not only is it not an issue to divide the Muslims with, the majority have always done so. The majority have always held it to be allowed. My issue here is not between Ibn Taymiyyah's view and the majority view. The issue here is, what have you studied that you're not aware of that? And if someone says, but you can't be aware of everything, yeah, but this is just such a big issue. Something that was allowed by 99.9% of the majority, and you don't know that it's allowed, that's because, my brother, you are following an Islam, which is a new Islam, that takes its source from just a few scholars today, and maybe 1 or 2 scholars over 1,000 years, within the 1,000-year period. If you're going to take your Islam selectively from one scholar here, one scholar, of course you're going to miss out the vast majority of religious learning. And then you are going to cause schisms and friction in the ummah, irrespective. This is what I mean by bad fatwa. Not that the Shaykh got it wrong, because human beings, we can all get things wrong. Or another example, just one more example, that was on TV some time ago that unfortunately I heard. So the Shaykh is sitting there, got his looks the part and whatever, and some woman phones him, it's a phoning thing, and says, yeah Shaykh, when you said that when a Muslim gets married, they need a wali. The woman needs a wali. Because he mentioned, the Sheikh mentioned in his discussion that the Hadith of the Prophet, there is no nikah without a wali and two just witnesses. There is no nikah without a wali and two just witnesses. And the Sultan is a wali for the one who has no wali. The Muslim ruler is the wali, or the state will appoint a wali for the one who has no wali. And there are other hadiths like that in Bukhari and Muslim. So this woman phones in, she says, Ya Shaykh, you know, I heard what you said, and the thing is, many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, whenever she said, I got married in Pakistan, and I didn't have a wali. I didn't have a wali, I just got married. Friends and some family was there, but I didn't have a wali. Like my father wasn't there, my uncle wasn't there. So, what to do? He said, there is no nikah without a wali. She goes, so what are we saying about my nikah? He said, there is no nikah without a wali. Meaning, what he's saying is, she doesn't have a nikah. Whilst it is true, the hadiths say exactly that, there is no nikah without a wali. And whilst it is true, the Shafi'is, the Malikis, and the Hanbalis, they all take this to be not just authoritative, but overriding. The condition for the correctness of a nikah, and shartu sihha, condition for the correctness, the validity of a nikah, is that there must be the consent of the wali. Normally the father of the girl, if not then the father's brother, if not then the father's father. And then it goes down like that. There must be the consent. That's according to the Shafi, according to the majority. The Hanafis say that it's not a condition for the validity, but it's good to have the wali. Meaning that if there is a marriage in which the wali isn't there, it's not necessarily null and void, whereas in the other schools, it is null and void. So if someone is a practicing Shafi'i or a practicing Hanbali, and they know the rule, and then they got married purposely without a wali, their marriage wouldn't be accepted. But if you're a practicing Hanafi, or by default, that's what the scholars around you are, even if you don't know that, then if you got married without a wali, there would be no violation, and the marriage would be intact. The marriage would be intact. So if there is a Hanafi sheikh, a Hanafi person here, and she got married without the consent of her father, it's bad. Will you get the barakah, going against your father, and all those other things. But if the father has un-Islamic objections, that could be another, then that takes into consideration. But the point being is, the validity of the marriage doesn't require a wali in the Hanafi school. In the other schools, in the other madhabs, it does, based upon those hadiths. And the Hanafis have a particular way of understanding those hadiths. So now, in Pakistan, someone who says, oh, I got married in Pakistan, they're not going to be Hanbali. There are as many Hanbalis on this earth today as there are dinosaurs. Okay? And it's unlikely to be she's going to be a Maliki. She could be a Shafi'i, but more than likely she's going to be a Hanafi. More than likely. And even if she is Shafi'i, the vast majority of scholars and the vast majority of masajid in Pakistan, and those who are going to perform the nikah are undoubtedly going to be Hanafi. So even if I'm a Shafi, even if I'm a Hanbali, I would say, if you were a Shafi, then sister, subhanAllah, you need to phone me and you need to come down with your husband and we need to speak about it. Because there's some complications there. But since you're in Pakistan, you're more than likely to have been just brought up in that atmosphere of Hanafism. Bismillah. He might say that, you know what, when your children get married, please make sure they have a wali, just whatever. But Bismillah. Not only that, And in fatwa, just in fatwa, alright? And I don't normally say this on the khutbah because it opens up too many cans of wine. Let's just say, two people, Shafi, let's say Shafi, they got married without a wali. It's only the woman, the girl who needs a wali, the man doesn't need a wali. They got married against the father's wishes, and he's the wali. And let's just say he wasn't even un-Islamic. He's not like a father who says, oh, you can't marry someone, I'm a Bengali, therefore you have to marry a Bengali. I'm a Urdu-speaking person, therefore you marry, wallah, you marry a Gujarati and I'll chop your head off. Not this racism or nationalism, okay? But he has a reliable objection. Young man, you don't have a job. How are you going to support my daughter? She's used to living at this level of comfort. She's not one of the awliya of Allah yet, okay, who she can live on one slice of bread or a week or whatever, or a month. Right? She can, we have 3 decent meals a day in the house. And every second day we have afters, desserts as well. Fudge cake, ice cream, whatever. So, come back after you got a job. This is a valid objection, but let's just say they got married against the father's wishes. Then, the scholars say, look, it's true that no nikah without a wali, but now actually they got married. Let's just say 2-3 days have passed. So, newly couple, they're not going to be watching TV and, whatever. They're going to do what married people do. So it's a bit of complication, but technically it looks like they don't have a marriage. And that the whole thing is zina. On paper, that's what it looks like. Shafi, no nikah without wali. The Shafi ulama, or the ulama like that, will say, in this case, now that it's happened, unapproved, we don't like it, didn't happen the right way, so many wrong things happen, but we're now talking about the honour of a woman and the honour of a man, and more so the honour of a woman, a young woman, okay? Then they say, okay, if the father can be convinced, even now, 3 days after they did it without his permission, that, okay, I accept, then the whole thing is sound and pakka and halal. Even though it didn't get his permission. Why? Because the problems that come if he says no. So the sheikh that will do his best to say, oh father, yes, you have the right to say no, and the qadi will come and split them up. But just bear in mind they've been together 3 days. And who are you going to convince her to marry? When her heart is already set, and even more than her heart now. So hopefully the father, in his sensibility, will say yes. And he'll make the best out of a kind of negative situation. Because in Islam, if we don't have 100% perfection, we don't throw everything away. Who is 100% perfect here? But we don't throw our Islam away. We're not 100% Muslim. Of course we're 100% Muslim in terms of our iman. Okay, we don't doubt Allah, the angels. I'm talking about just as how a Muslim should be. Okay? Who's 100%? No, but we don't say, oh, so I can't do 100%, I might as well do 0%. And make the apostasy, no. So life is like that. Life is like that. We have many, sometimes, this young man, alhamdulillah, has become too attached to a woman or vice versa. And it happens, but it's still haram. It happened, but it's still haram. Okay. But you say to the father, look, he's a Muslim, she's a Muslim. They saw each other in university, he's probably got some qualifications, he's probably going to have some qualifications. Khalas, why say no? This was not your plan. And there was haram going on. But sorry, father, what? You moved from Pakistan to come and live in England. Well, you made your bed, you better lie in it. Not your children's fault that they were brought up in this environment. You chose that. You should have thought what type of environment. But now, at least she has seen a Muslim and vice versa. Yes, you are, as a father, if you put your foot down and say, I don't agree, khalas, your daughter can't get married. But who are you going to suggest instead? And is your daughter going to accept it? Or will you just say, you know what? Maybe I can say yes because it's gone that far, or it's going, you know, or the hearts are there, and maybe I will try to reach out to her and say, you know, like, look at what you did in disobedience. If you want your marriage to be blessed, and I'm ready to accept it, then at least turn to Allah and mend your ways. Otherwise, the sin will come back to haunt you. Otherwise, the sin of not only disobeying Allah, boyfriend, girlfriend, major sin, but the sin of disobeying parents, those two sins alone will come back to haunt you, unless you reform. If she says yes, then just say Bismillah. Bismillah. You could say no, but where's the benefit? Then you get your daughter married to someone she doesn't want, her heart's not there, her mind's not there, and what, she becomes an obedient one? No, she's just in a miserable marriage. She's just in a miserable marriage. And who did you get her married to? Probably not a very good person anyway. This is not saying that we shouldn't work for the best situation. This is just saying in life, sometimes the best situation doesn't occur. If the best situation doesn't occur, we try to make the best of a situation. And believe you me, we do that with everybody. Look. The same hadith says, there is no nikah except with a wali and shahidei adli. Shahidei adli. Two male just witnesses. Someone being adl in Islam, just in Islam, adala. One of the conditions of adala is the person keeps away from major sins. Most people say just sins, but some scholars say major sins. If a person is engaging in major sins, khalas, his adala, his justness is broken. Well, that's about 99% of us. Right? Right? So somewhere, some wali of Allah, somewhere in E11, he's probably there. You ever try to do a marriage and you need two just witnesses and you're running around town finding this wali of Allah, where he possibly, and there's only one of them, you need two as well, right? Right? That doesn't mean that, so what do we do? What do we do? The scholars had to improvise. That's the ideal situation. But given the fact that we've deteriorated from the ideal, we have to make the best of the situation. You have to make the best at the moment with someone like me, who 100 years ago, even someone like me would be 1,000 times better than me. Right? Someone like me would be 1,000 times better than me. But I would suggest someone like you 100, 200, 300 years ago would likely be 1,000 times better than you. The level of the lay people's Islam has deteriorated. The scholarliness of the scholars has deteriorated. Why? Because as time goes by, the whole age deteriorates, except a few exceptions. And we just, it's not that we say, oh, so now let's not do 5 times a day, let's deteriorate to 2 times a day. It just means that less people will be like the former people. And we just have to work even harder to go against the tide. Anyway, so what this sheikh should have said, rather than just saying that thing, which now causes the woman to think, well, my 30 years of marriage is not a marriage, and God knows what if she's had children, let's just assume she has children, they're what, all illegitimate? Such a person has no right to be a mufti. And the mosque that invited him, if he was qualified khalas, then he should be told or swapped, and the mosque has no responsibility, or the TV channel has no responsibility. But you got him in what? Because he looked nice, he was a really good speaker. Allah will take the mosque to task, or the TV station to task, or the newspaper to task, who got a fake sheikh. And the sin of his fatwa will go on the sin of the ones who put him there as well. I can't tell you how bad some people are in their fatwa, even in knowledge. It's a bit like if you have graduated from I don't know, Imperial College in Medicine, and you've done 6 years in medicine, Imperial, and 2 years in whatever, then you kind of have a pretty good understanding of who is a good surgeon and who is not, even though you might not have reached the level yourself of being that medical, but you have a good idea. So from my vantage point, and vantage point of people like me, we have a good idea when people give fatwas and they don't. And you see some nightmare things. Nightmare issues. Some sunnahs become bid'ahs, and some bid'ahs become sunnahs. Some majority issues that the jumhur al-ulama, the majority of the ulama have said, this is from the Sharia, are now being treated as if they are nothing to do with Islam. Who needs the actual enemies of Islam to actually come and attack Islam when you have from within inside that level of darkness and ignorance? And who is it coming from? Not the lay person, the so-called person who's studied a bit. So the halal is clear, the haram is clear. In between there are doubtful matters. Doubtful because I don't know the proof text, not a problem. When I don't know, I ask the person of knowledge. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. That's really important. You should know the difference between someone like me and someone like, let me think. Do you know, has a Mufti Muhammad ibn Adam al-Kawthri been to this masjid? Mufti Mangira? Okay, so Sheikh Shams has been here, yeah, okay. Well, in that kind of triage of well-known speakers, Sheikh Shams, Mufti Mangira, Mufti Muhammad ibn Adam al-Kawthri, and they're all kind of they come from the same stream, same school and same juristic background. Definitely, two of them are actually qualified to give fatwas. Maybe all three of them are qualified to give fatwas. Qualified. So you can ask them more or less anything, and things that they won't know, don't know, but they'll know so much. Then they're qualified actually. They've gone through fatwa training, whatever. I haven't gone through the fatwa training thing. In most cases, I'm a naqid. Things that I've studied and I have authorization for, then I teach. But fatwas, I've never actually, even though I know my fiqh, and I know the common fiqh that people probably would need, but most of the time I'll be a naqil, a transmitter, not a mufti. Now, alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah, I'm aware of where my level is. Even though I've studied fiqh, and I've studied fiqh for 20 years, but I haven't taken an official mufti course. Maybe if I take one, I'll do well. Maybe I'll do rubbish. Who knows? But I haven't taken one, and therefore, and neither has any sheikh said, yes, Abu Aaliyah, I give you ijazah authorizations to give your own fatwas. Good thing is, I'm aware of that, and with Allah's help, as long as I remember it, I'm less likely to step over my limit. I'm less likely. And the reason why I mention these things is because it's more helpful to me, to remind me where I am and where I'm not. Now in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, so to many of you I could be a mufti. That's fine, however, but if you start asking me some fatwa questions, either I know it well or I don't. If I don't know it, I can't be inventing my own fatwas, because I'm not a mufti. I can relate to you, and hopefully in context, and hopefully for your situation. But if I can't, you need to go to a mufti, brother. But Abu Aaliyah, I need something now. Fine, but it's a bit like you saying you need an operation now. I have a knife and a fork, but that hardly qualifies me as a surgeon. You have to be that much patient to get yourself to Whip's Cross or wherever it is. Likewise, you need that much patience to get yourself to a mufti. You have to be strict on this. The whole thing breaks down if both sides don't work on it. Then the Prophet ﷺ says, فَمَنِ اتَّقَى الشُّبَهَاتِ فَقَدْ اسْتَبْرَعَ لِدِينِهِ وَعِرْضِهِ. Whoever keeps away from doubtful matters and the grey areas. And let's just say, I asked a scholar and he even said, to him it's a grey area. So if it's a grey area to him, it's a grey area to me. The scholar is now not saying, yes, it's in this halal camp or it's in this haram camp. He's saying, no, this is grey area. Then whoever keeps away from these doubtful matters now it really becomes doubtful. I mean, it was doubtful for me to me before. But then I asked the scholar, and it was kind of doubtful to him. Definitely doubtful to him. Whoever keeps away from the doubtful has safeguarded his religion and his honor, his religious honor. He safeguarded his religion. Why? Because if this was haram and he kept away from it, he's safe. If it was halal and he kept away from it, halal doesn't mean you have to do it. Like bread is halal, it doesn't mean I have to eat it. Okay? So if it was haram and you keep away from it, you're safe. If it was halal, but you still kept away from it, okay, you missed the fact of having bread, but at least you're safe. So whoever keeps away from the doubtful matters safeguards his religion and his ilm, his honor. And simply because a Muslim's honor was always connected to taqwa and obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Muslim honor was never connected to your job, your social status, okay, or how many children you had, or your Muslim status, your honor as a Muslim was never connected to whether you were born Arab speaking or Ajami speaking. It was inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, the noblest of you, most honorable of you in the sight of Allah, those who have most honor. Okay, so your honor and your religion is safe. وَمَنْ وَقَعَ فِي الشُّبَهَاتِ وَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ. But whoever falls into the doubtful matters has possibly fallen into the haram, or will fall into the haram. Maybe not on that occasion, but if we have a habit of always just going into doubtful matters, then out of those 10 doubtful matters, 7 of them are likely to be haram, 5 of them are likely to be haram, 3 of them are likely to be haram, but it's still haram. And with haram comes the anger of Allah, the ghadab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we're simply not able to withstand the divine anger. So whoever falls into the doubtful matters will fall into the haram. We're not talking about on one particular mas'ala or issue, but generally, if that's our attitude, then they will fall into haram. Karai, and then he gives a beautiful example. Karai yara hawla al-hima yushiku an yarta'a fihi. Just like a shepherd who grazes around a sanctuary, a piece of land that specifically belongs to someone else. So here is this land. Say my sajjada, what do we call this in Urdu? Musalla. No, what's the word I'm looking for in Urdu? Janamaz, that's it. So this sajjada, musalla, this janamaz, this prayer mat, that was the English word I was using, the prayer mat. Okay, this sajjada. Let's just say this sajjada is the thing, the sanctuary, the grass, the meadow, the forest, that belongs to someone else. So the wise shepherd, the Prophet said, he would just graze, he'll get his animals to graze quite far, 2, 3, 4, 5 meters, 100 meters away, so that they don't actually graze accidentally, unknowingly, just straight into from the halal pastures to the haram pastures because it belongs to someone else. So, just like a shepherd who grazes around a sanctuary, all but grazing therein. Like the shepherd who pastures around a sanctuary, all but grazing therein. Then he says, أَلَا وَإِنَّ لِكُلِّ مَلِكٍ حِمَى أَلَا وَإِنَّ لِكُلِّ مَلِكٍ حِمَى. Every king has a sanctuary. Once upon a time, I think still now, but it doesn't mean too much to us now, the whole of Epping Forest, which is our local forest lands in E10, E11, even in E4, Chingford, right? The whole of Epping Forest, which is now not forest, it's all broken up now, but once upon a time, Epping Forest used to be huge, huge. All of it was the king's forest. If you and I hunted a deer in the king's forest and we got caught by the king's men, we could have been executed because there was no hunting except with express permission of the king in the king's forest. This was the hima of the kings and queens of England for long, 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 long ages. And there are other forests that are royal forests throughout the country. Totally haram. Even if a boy of 7 was found hunting in it, they would maybe probably execute him or something like this. Prophet say, in the ancient way of how people lived, every king has a sanctuary. This is a king. He has some, what's the word? Some extra things that other people don't have. And indeed, the Prophet said, "Ala wa inna himallahi maharimuhu." And indeed, the sanctuary of Allah are the things that He's made haram, the haram things, the muharramat. So don't graze too near the haram things. But then there is a border there, which is the border between clearly halal and clearly halal and clearly haram. Those are the shubahat. Those are the grey areas. Just keep far away from the grey areas, and we will not stray into the haram. But we kind of come close to the grey areas. Sooner or later, we will tread over that fine line and come into the haram. Leave that which makes you doubt for that which doesn't make you doubt. Is the general religious adab and philosophy. Indeed, Allah's sanctuary are His prohibitions. Indeed, there is a piece of flesh in the body. ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب. Indeed, there is a piece of flesh in the body. If that piece of flesh be whole and sound, all of the body is whole and sound. And if that piece of flesh be diseased and corrupted, all of the body will be diseased and corrupted. Indeed, that is the heart. But bear in mind, not the physical heart that is left centered on the body, but the spiritual heart, which they say is roughly where the physical heart is, but it's not one and the same thing. And look how the Prophet connects, subhanAllah, it's really ajib. Look how he connects halal and haram to spiritual purification. Indeed, there's a piece of flesh in the body. If that piece of flesh be whole and sound, if there is Islam, salah in that heart, then all of the body will be whole and sound. If the piece of flesh if this heart is diseased, then all of the body, its limbs will be diseased, and that piece of flesh is the heart, the spiritual heart. How it's connected to the halal and haram, it's as if the Prophet is wanting us to understand what we put into our body of food, what we wear on our body as clothes, the earnings that we bring into our house with which we buy these things, if they are not halal, bayyinun, as clear as possibly can be, then they could have haram in it or be completely haram, and that's going to have an effect on the heart. That's going to have a negative effect on the heart. And if someone says, look, I understand that if the heart has some qualities inside of it, it will show on the limbs. If the heart has love inside of it, then the tongue will say loving words. If the heart has love inside of it, the hands will do loving deeds. The face will smile a loving smile. If the heart inside has anger, then the face and the body will do angry things. I get that if the heart is a particular way, then the body will reflect that. But you're telling me that now if the body is a particular way, the heart will reflect that. Oh, that's a strange thing. Psychology teaches me if the heart is a particular way, the body will reflect that. But now you're telling me that as Muslims we should believe the opposite as well. Well, listen to the words of the Prophet ﷺ just to complete this discussion. The Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith, which some of you might even be familiar with, I'm sure, Istaw wa la takhtalifu fatakhtalifa qulubukum. Straighten your rows, and do not differ, meaning do not separate. فَتَخْتَلِفَ قُلُوبُكُمْ. Allah will separate your hearts. Outwardly not doing our best to straighten the rows and fill in the gaps. فَتَخْتَلِفَ قُلُوبُكُمْ. Or else your hearts will separate. Meaning, certain outward actions that we do can have negative consequences on our heart. Now the Freudian people of this world, the psychoanalysts and the psychotherapists and the psychos might not know this, right? But it's there in our teachings. Both ways work. Another one. لا يستقيم إيمان عبد حتى يستقيم قلبه. A person's iman will not be upright, firm and upright, until his heart is firm and upright, is upon istiqamah, is firm and uprightness. وَلَا يَسْتَقِيمُ قَلْبُهُ حَتَّى يَسْتَقِيمَ لِسَانُهُ. And the heart will not be upright until the tongue is upright. So the outward actions of the tongue, of its speech, is going to have a profound effect on the inner. So acts of obedience will begin to have a positive effect on the heart. Sins will have a disastrous effect on the heart. And then when the heart is darkened more, it will cause the body to do even more dark works. And then as the body does worse and worse sins, the heart becomes darker and darker, more sinful and sinful. And the more sinful it is, then the more sinful the deeds, and it becomes cyclical. So you've heard me tell the story of the weatherman and the Indian. Yeah? No? Yes?
No.
Two of you definitely have. Who has not heard the story? Okay, just for you then, brother. Okay, so I'm saying to you that if the heart is good, then the body, it will influence the body to do good. But according to these hadith, if the limbs do good deeds, it will positively influence the heart as well. So it becomes like a circular or cyclical thing. So there is this story, the Indian and the weatherman. So there was this Indian chief, not Indian as in Gujarati Indian or whatever. I'm talking about that, Native American Indian. Okay, the ones who used to kind of roam around that lovely, large place in the world called North America, until some kind of extremists came along and terrorized them, and then they founded a state that now accuses the Muslims of terrorism, and there you have it. Probably not going to be invited to that country now. The United States of Aggression, of course. So there is this Native American Indian, and he knew the ways of the old ancient ways. Okay, the weather, check the ground. He was really in touch with all that stuff, and he died. And his son took over to be the chief of the tribe, but his son kind of got educated in, I don't know, in some fancy university, didn't live with the Indians, doesn't know the way, but they took him as their chief. So winter is approaching, and all the tribe gather around. They said, "Oh, our new chief, what's the weather going to be like this winter?" Because every winter they would come to the old man, the old chief and the old chief, just by telling the signs and whatever, he had given the forecast for winter. So they come to the son, the new chief, and he goes, "The weather, come back tomorrow and I'll tell you the ancient wisdoms." So they said, okay. He runs back home, he gets on the telephone, he phones up the weather station. He said, "Oh, weatherman, what do you predict or forecast for this coming winter?" He said, "It's going to be cold." He goes, "Oh, thank you very much." Next day, he said, "Oh, my people, you asked me about winter. Through the old ways, I'm telling you, it's going to be cold. So go and cut some wood." So off they go, chopping down some trees to get some wood. And he knows they're going to come back again and ask in a few weeks' time. So he goes home, and a few days later he phones that weatherman. He says, "Weatherman, just update. Any more news on this winter weather, coming winter weather?" He said, "Yeah, actually, yeah. We've revised our forecast. It's going to be it's more bitterly cold than we expected. Bitter cold." He goes, "Thank you. Oh, my people, it's going to be very cold. Cut down even more firewood." So off they go, cutting down the trees. Few days later, he phones up the weatherman and says, "Revised forecast?" He goes, "Yes, you can't believe it, sir. It's going to be freezing." So he goes, because the man goes back to the tribe and says, "Oh, my tribe, it's going to be an ice age. Cut down every tree and get as much firewood as you can." And after a few days, he's a little bit, goes, "Oh, no. Excuse me, weatherman. Just wanted to be sure that you're saying it's going to be blistery ice age." Like, he goes, "Yes. Because how do you know this? How do you know so precisely the weather? He says, oh, it's easy. We just see how much wood the Indians are cutting. Circular. Okay, so that's a circular argument.
What's the life story?
I found it in a book on philosophy. It was teaching philosophy by way of jokes. And I really like that one. And it really fits well with the kind of thing. Anyway. So if it's true or not, I don't know. But we're Indians, many of us. Point being is, the Prophet ﷺ was saying that Islam al-Qalb, just to finish it now, Islam al-Qalb, rectification of the heart, comes along with rectification of the outward actions. The more we rectify our outward actions, the more it positively helps to rectify our heart. And likewise, the more we rectify our heart, the more our outward actions will be rectified. أَلَا إِنَّ فِي الْجَسَدِ مُضْغَةً إِذَا صَلَحَتْ صَلَحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ. Indeed, there is a piece of flesh in the body. If it is sound, the limbs will be sound, the body will be sound. If it is corrupted, spiritually corrupted, the limbs will do haram deeds. أَلَا وَهِيَ الْقَلْبُ. That piece of flesh is the heart. No doubt this hadith is telling us that inward rectification will help the outward. But the hadith is also indicating that beware of halal and haram in terms of your rizq, in terms of your clothes, in terms of your food, in terms of all of these things, because outwardly doing haram will have a negative impact. Because the islahul qalb comes about through, they say, eating haram, eating halal, aklul halal. It comes about through dhikrullah, the remembrance of Allah. Majalisus salihin, sitting down in the company of righteous Muslims. Qira'atul Quran, bitadabbur, reading the Quran with some kind of reflection and contemplation. Istighfar bil ashar, seeking Allah's forgiveness in the early morning, also in the depth of the night. These are the main things which bring about the islahul qalb, salah of the heart, that making sure that we have a halal livelihood, as halal as possible, making sure that we're doing the fara'id, the acts of the obligatory acts, and trying to increase in our remembrance of Allah, sitting down in the company of righteous people, reciting the Quran, ideally with reflection, because when we reflect upon the words of Allah, even a small amount of medicine begins to have a really big effect on us. But if we read the Quran just boom, 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 I'm not saying there's no ajr. There is always ajr. There's always reward, even if we don't understand what we read. But it's not going to have that type of effect that reading the Quran with tadabbur does. So we should have time when we read the Quran just for barakah and ajr and reward, trying to make a khatam of it, okay, once a month. I mean, in the month of Ramadan especially. But we should also have times where we try to have tadabbur upon the Quran, contemplate upon, not making fatwas, not looking for any rulings, just get the broad message and how that's becoming internalized in my heart. And istighfar, because we are people who transgress the boundaries of Allah, and it's His haqq that we ask Him for forgiveness. So with these things being said, the final thing is we should occupy ourselves more with inward acts of rectifying the heart than outward acts, but we must occupy ourselves with both. We must occupy ourselves with amal salih, outward, righteous deeds outwardly, deeds of the tongue, deeds of the limbs, but we should occupy ourselves with salahul qalb, islahul qalb, rectifying our heart through removing envy, jealousy, through removing showing off and love of fame and love of worldliness, through removing arrogance and vanity, because these things are deadly. And we can turn to the dua of the Prophet, one authentic dua that he said, Allahumma ij'al sarirati khayran min alaniyati waj'al alaniyati salihah. Subhanallah. Oh Allah, make my inward better than my outward, but make my outward righteous. So if Allah makes that outward righteous, and I'm asking Allah to make my inward better than my outward, And if my outward is made righteous by Allah, imagine what my inward could be. It could be nur, angelic. That should be the aspiration of every Muslim. That, oh Allah, make our inward better than our outward. Ya Allah, make our outward righteous. SubhanAllah. What an aspiration. And just imagine if each of us were to improve on this and make this dua a reality and strive might and main to internalize this reality. And we just did it by 2 or 3%, 1 or 2 or 3% change. SubhanAllah, it would be dazzling for our own connection with Allah. It would be dazzling to other people and the invitation to Islam. But the challenge of the time is not just to defend the frontiers of the actual Islamic faith. In terms of physical attacks on Muslims, which are alarmingly getting more and more increasing, but also to make sure that hearts are purified. And I wonder, have some of the enemies of Allah worked it out? Have some of the enemies of Allah worked out that let the Muslims do some of the outward actions that they want most of the time. But if we can start changing their inside, making them love our sunnahs, our way, our aspirations, more than the aspirations in the Quran, the way of life in the Quran, I wonder if some of the enemies haven't already worked that out and are actually waging that type of ideological war. Because that type of ideological war is far greater than any physical war, even though physical wars are really bad. That is to say, though I can choose my cornflakes, can I have this brand or that brand, though I can choose my own what type of shoes and what type of travel, but is my heart actually still liberated and free, or has that been enslaved to the fashions and the philosophies and the tastes of the time? No heart is ever free except the heart that is earnestly connected to Allah in His tawheed, upon the sunnah of His beloved Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Otherwise every heart is enslaved. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for freedom, for tawfiq. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, salamun ala al-mursalin, walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. 5 minutes, and we're at 9:50. 5 minutes for any questions, inshallah.